Welcome back, everyone. Let's begin after no technical interruptions whatsoever. 2 weeks ago, we talked about animal sentience, and the question was, the framework was, what animals do we need to take the most care of? With the idea that sentient animals deserve more of our concern and care because they can genuinely suffer or they could genuinely flourish. And that discussion, I said, was mostly framed in terms of a utilitarian moral outlook. So, the moral thing to do is whatever creates the most happiness for the most people. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to present a potentially different moral framework than utilitarianism, a kind of virtue ethics framework. And the relation between this, we're doing plant intelligence today. The relation between this moral framework and the plant intelligence stuff is, the moral framework will assume that plants can be agents, that all living things are agents. And I'm going to try to leverage the plant intelligence stuff to have us think about whether plants are properly thought of as goal-directed agents. So just to clear up how this relates to anything. So any moral framework, the point of it is to help us understand how to act, right? What should we do? What's the rational thing to do? Moral concerns might be one reason for acting, one reason for doing things. You might have other reasons for doing things, aesthetic reasons, your desires and interests, that kind of thing. So acting rationally is then finding the right balance amongst possible concerns. One worry that's in this kind of literature about utilitarianism is it seems to be perfectly fine with somebody having just the worst, most awful interests that you can imagine. Whatever the worst thing you can imagine somebody desiring is, let's not do examples, but utilitarianism counts satisfaction of that desire as positive utility. This leads you to places like, if somebody just gets incredible amounts of joy out of just flicking quarters at people in the subway, it's nothing that's going to be totally traumatic to the people being disrespected. And that person's just loving it. I just love flicking quarters at people in the subway. That might come out under utilitarianism as a morally correct thing to do. And you might look at that and go, that doesn't seem right to me. There are versions of utilitarianism where that does not come out as true, but on the really simple basic version that we've been talking about, that might be true. So that seems odd. Similarly, so that's one concern you might have about utilitarianism, that it seems to countenance some things that intuitively you might say are just wrong, but the utility function works out such that it produces more happiness than unhappiness. Another worry you might have about utilitarianism was from last week, where we talked about Hinduism, and there's this idea that there's just some dimension of human experience that doesn't boil down to simple happiness and unhappiness. So the stage right before liberation, right before moksha, you're supposed to kind of retire from your community. You sort of seclude yourself and don't do much. You're supposed to untangle yourself from both good and bad karma. Similarly, you see in Buddhism, the whole goal in Buddhism, in every version of Buddhism that I'm aware of, is liberation from the cycle of desire and satisfaction. Clinging is the ultimate source of suffering in Buddhism. Wanting things is the source of suffering, and liberation is getting away from that. I want this and then I got it. So desire and satisfaction are the problem for Buddhism, which is super hard in my mind. Okay, so let me phrase this carefully. It is not at all obvious to me how to square those ideas with utilitarianism. I don't want to say that it's impossible, but I don't know how to do that. They don't seem to fit nicely with this count up how many utils people get and versus negative utility. So there's some perhaps limits to utilitarianism as a general moral framework. So let's try another thing. Here's a different thing that you could think in terms of. Consider Philippa Foot's book, Natural Goodness. So it's a 2001 book. Philippa Foot's a philosopher, mostly of biology. And she argues that it's a quite different way of thinking about morality. Moral considerations are kind of grounded in the details of human flourishing. So thinking about what makes a good action or a good life, the good action and good life have the same basic structure as a good tree. That there's a kind of characteristic flourishing for each species, and the thing that you should do to guide your action is pay attention to what your species is like, what flourishing looks like for your species, and do that.
Okay.
So she asks us, one of her examples is, say, a good cactus. What makes a cactus good? Not what makes it good for us. So there's an instrumental version of this where I want a cactus to, look spherical because I like spheres or whatever it is. She says there's a sense in which, Foote says, there's a sense in which there's a good for the cactus. And that you can tell when a cactus is diseased or damaged or otherwise not failing to flourish. You can tell the difference between that and a cactus which is flourishing. Does that, okay, so let me stop there. Does that seem obvious to you, or does it seem problematic to you? And you look at a plant, can you go, oh, that plant's doing well, versus a plant that's like, ooh, there are some, I have a garden that I've neglected quite some time. There are some plants in my garden where I go, oh, I'm sorry, snow peas, I've done badly by you. Does this work as a premise for us, that there's a flourishing for plants? Characteristic to their species, like a flourishing, yeah.
To an extent.
Yeah.
If the plant is, let's say, chopping up, I would probably see a start.
Right.
It's to the is to at a small extent, if I'm not professionally trained or taking examination and how can I be able to know.
Good. Okay. So, but that's a fact. So you might not be able to diagnose it. For my part, I have an app on my phone that tells me if my plant is diseased. So, I can't necessarily diagnose it, but do you agree that there is a fact of the matter about whether the plant is doing well on its own terms, I guess is the question.
Yes.
Yeah? Good. Yeah.
I think that plant doing well or not that definitely can be the case, but the idea that it's flourishing sounds like a human term that we're
good. Yeah.
Anthropology, making it
anthropomorphizing. Yeah.
What kind of
yeah.
Yeah, it'll keep the human turn.
Good. I think that's fair. So to say it's flourishing might be a bit much. It's not like going to university and like making its parents proud or whatever. It's growing in the characteristic way of its species. Maybe you might say it's doing well. If you want to resist flourishing, that makes sense to me. Yeah. Yeah.
Flourishing to reading was the plants that does. Definition survive is it normal? Because
yeah,
is that sort of the sentence?
So I don't think you have to go by evolutionary fitness. You could, so if you're hands up if you've ever grown pot before. Anyone? No. Okay. So when you're growing pot, I've heard you isolate the cannabis plant has males and females. And if you're going to grow a bunch of pot, what you want are the females because those are the ones that produce flowers. If there's any males in there, you're in trouble because they'll go to seed. So you actually set the reproductive chances of the cannabis plant to 0 by isolating from the males, which would allow them to reproduce. Nonetheless, I think that there's a reasonable sense in which you can go, oh, that plant's doing really well, or oh, that plant is not doing well. Even independent of our instrumental, like I want some pot. Does that make sense? So you can, or okay, I should have picked a less weird example, but like, you can have like an orchid in your house if there's no other orchids around to pollinate it, but it's doing really well. So oftentimes just one of a plant can't reproduce. Its fitness is 0, but you can go, wow, it's doing really well. Is that? I don't know. Okay, I belabor this because she's going to use this is actually a essential, crucial premise for the rest of her morality. She says. Foote argues for natural norms, which are objective facts, independent of our interests or goals, about what's good for a species. Now, Now, the norms are going to be different for every species. A plant growing a bunch of spikes, or a cactus growing a bunch of spikes is good for a cactus. If you're growing a bunch of spikes, see a doctor immediately, because that's not good for you. So individual species level norms, but norms nonetheless. Natural norms that are out there in nature. And that requires, she says, that us thinking about all living things as agents that have goals. The fern is trying to unfold such that it can have leaves that photosynthesize. It is in an agentic, goal-directed way, trying to live out its natural sort of life cycle or whatever. So that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. There's quite a few people if you're taking biology, your professors might tell you specifically that this is false. They might say, yeah, it looks like it's goal-directed, but that's not actually real. It's just a bunch of chemical reactions or something like that. Foote wants us to take this seriously as a real natural fact. Plenty of controversy in there, but let's sort of like dig in a little more. She actually says that recognizing something as alive requires this framework, this perspective, as treating it as an agent. So it's an agent in the sense that it's got a variety of actions it can take. It's got some depth or some possibilities of action, and that it takes the actions that move it towards its goal. It selects from amongst its possible behaviors to move towards a goal. A puddle grows when it's raining, but it's not trying to grow. It can't do a good or bad job of growing. The puddle's not doing a good job, it's not doing a bad job, it's just being a puddle. But the grass is trying to grow, and it can do a good or bad job of that. So that's the connection between agency, goal-directedness, and normativity. If you're an agent with goals, you can be doing a good or bad job of approaching those goals. So far, so good. Again, I don't want to offer you this as some sort of like established objective fact. In fact, all of these moral frameworks I'm offering you not as any one is correct, but just to have them on the table to kind of kick around. Okay, here's where it gets tricky. And we're mostly going to set this part of the conversation aside. I just want to show you where she goes with it. So there's simple natural normativity, and that is the proper ground for the basis of our own practical judgments. Be a good human is her essential moral prescription. Now, for the cactus and the fern, that's pretty straight. What it means to be a good cactus or a good fern is fairly straightforward. But we are somewhat more, we're in a more challenging position. We, for example, don't just grow and live. We have this whole layer of ideas about what is good for us, and all of our actions sort of are filtered through those ideas. So at least that layer of abstraction is present in us, not in plants. She says stuff like when one of her actually her very last paper, she's trying to make sense of this case of, and this is an actual, she quotes a letter from some poor kid from a farm in former Czechoslovakia who decides to be executed rather than join the SS. So he's offered a position in the Nazi war machine, and he says, no, I'd rather die. And Foote's trying to make sense of like, how could this be rational? From a utilitarian perspective, that kid has just taken all of his potential interests and desires and negated them. He doesn't get to have any more desires, doesn't get to have any more interests. And how could that be rational? Foote says, well, that might be because the way in which that might be rational is that that's being a good human. There's something about our species, so these are species-specific norms, something about being a human that says that's the right thing to do. Now, if you've done any history of anthropology, you know the very concept of good human is incredibly fraught. And some horrifyingly awful things have been said in that conversation. What this does, Foote thinks, is put this question of what it means to be a good human front and center as an object that we need to be arguing about. what is it that is good for our species? And then that will tell you, that will be a guide for action. So this is a version of virtue ethics. The idea is not to judge our actions based on their consequences, but judge the kind of character that they come out of. So, you know, for Foot, the answer is something like be a good human, and you'll flesh that out by looking at what it means to be a human being. That includes, she's a kind of neo-Aristotelian, that means being a rational animal. It probably also means something like telling stories, being social, playing. These are things that are absolutely universal across human cultures. Those might be species-specific things, and the capacity to do that might be part of what it means to flourish as a human. That sort of stuff. I don't know. Concerns or thoughts on this? Okay. I propose, okay, so that bit about humans is a bit complex and hairy. It's not going to be on the midterm. We're going to set aside the messy human bits for a second and retrace our steps back to this idea that plants could be agents with goals. That's what we'll spend the rest of the class talking about. What would it look like for a plant to behave in a goal-directed manner? And if you haven't spent some time with this, this might be counterintuitive. What do you mean goal-directed? They just sit there. They just sit there and photosynthesize. Yeah.
Like a plant would grow, a tree would grow its branches for something.
That kind of thing. Yes, exactly. That's the kind of goal-directed activity. And I mean, before I looked into this stuff, I did not know that plants could do that kind of thing. It hadn't occurred to me. They seem so inert. But when we look at the science, we'll find that they're not all that inert. Actually, they're doing a whole bunch of stuff. So, main reading for this week, Segundo, Orton, and Calvo, they say the following. And this could be, you know, they don't have Philippa Foot in mind, but this seems to me like exactly the kind of thing that Foot asks us to believe about the living world. Overall, we hold that plant cognition encompasses behavioral patterns that are adaptable, flexible, anticipatory, and goal-directed. Anticipatory might be even surprising there. So like growing towards the sun is already there and you're just responding to that. In the reading for this week, they make the case that plants can actually anticipate things that are going to happen. So that's the rest of this lecture. We'll explore that. Let's take a break now. Let's take 10. We'll come back and talk about stuff that plants can do and ask ourselves, does it make sense to think of them as agents? Okay, yeah, come back at noon. Welcome back. Okay, so we're gonna dive into the plant cognition literature. This is a small but flourishing research program, mostly trying to apply the kind of tools in behavioral psychology to plants to see what they can do. I would summarize this literature as inconclusive. I don't think that there's any like really profound evidence currently on the table that plants are sentient or super duper smart. You don't hire them and for your startup or whatever, get a person or at least a mammal. Nonetheless, they are impressively agentive. And I should also just flag at the beginning the difference between absence of evidence and evidence of absence. We currently have an absence of evidence about really fancy thinking in plants, but maybe we don't know how to look for it yet. That seems to be an entirely possible thing. It might be that we're testing houseplants, and we should be testing the vast, like 400-ton mycorrhizal networks underneath the forest for intelligence. It could be we're looking in the wrong places. So I'll show you what we got. I think it's really cool and interesting. I just think this stuff is super neat. So let's talk about it. I don't know that it adds up to, crab level intelligence. I'll just say that at the outset. So, okay. So what can plants do? What would qualify them as behaving? One of the things that qualifies animals as behaving is movement. And there are indeed a few plants that can move on timescales we can see. So Mimosa pudica, the sensitive plant, has anybody seen this in action? Have you ever gotten to jab a sensitive plant? You touch its, good, a few of you nodding. It's so cool. You touch its little leaves and they go, they sort of like fold up. They curl up and they try to, it's shy. So there's a kind of movement that plants can do. Mimosa pudica's movement. You can think of heliotropism, which is following the sun. Lots of flowers do this. So as the sun goes across the sky, they kind of turn over the course of a day. Faster movement like Venus flytrap. Interestingly, both the Mimosa pudica and Venus flytrap, their movements are reduced in response to the kind of things that we use on animals as general anesthetics. If you anesthetize them, they don't move as much. Odd. Okay, so there's a thing that plants can do that at least in animals we count as behavioral. This kind of research has a actually surprisingly long history. Charles Darwin wrote this book in 1880 in collaboration with his son on various forms of movement in plants. And his thesis, it's an odd writing style. He saves the punchline for the very last. He says, this is the closing line of the book. It's hardly an exaggeration to say that the tip of the radical, that's just the end of the root, thus endowed with sensitivity and having the power of directing the movement of the adjoining parts, acts like the brain of one of the lower animals. The brain being seated within the anterior end of the body, receiving impressions from the sense organs and directing the several movements. Darwin was convinced that the root structure of plants is like their brain, and that it could, through a long series of kind of experiments on plants, what happens when you snip off the tip of the root or disturb it or stuff like that, and you could see that the roots would grow in response to various perturbations. And he was convinced, he's like, look, this is like plants, A, can move, and B, they move intelligently in response to their environment. And that we should think of the brain of the plant as being in its root structure. So it's a long history of attributing behavior and in some sense cognition to plants. Okay, so now the examples I just gave you were mostly, so heliotropism is the slowest, the Venus flytrap and the sensitive plant. Those come up as examples because of the kind of time scales that fit within the human boredom window. I'm not going to sit and watch literally a plant grow because that's boring and I have stuff I want to do. But that doesn't mean that it's not a form of behavior, right? What captures my interest is not a fact of nature about what counts as behavior. And it's, maybe growth is a kind of movement. So maybe you don't want to call that movement. I don't generally speaking think my own growth was a movement. It's a different sort of thing. But if growth is adaptive and flexible, that's enough for us, right? The thing that we're trying to test here is, are plants agents and maybe are they thinking? Okay, so there. You can see, this is morning glories, I think, and they're growing in response to their environment. If it lands a sucker on something solid, it will grow in that direction. You see, any bean plant will do this. Yep, yeah.
Also, like walking trees, which will always decay old roots, grow new ones to move a couple meters per year for where it's bedded solid.
What? Okay. Walking trees. I did not know that. I'm going to include that in this lecture next year. Thank you. Sorry, so it's got roots, so it's like putting it roots in front of it, and the one behind it is
I think so. Decay older and relocate viewers into conditions which are so it can effectively build itself.
Why? Sorry.
See the amount of sunlight it can move itself to place.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, again, not nearly in the human boredom window, but the fact that it's called a walking tree suggests people noticed anyway. Yeah. Cool. Okay, thank you for that. So it would be interesting to see if they walk in response to environmental stimuli. Do they sometimes settle down or this is great? I'll look it up. That's fascinating. Thank you. Okay. Okay, but that's not the only, so there's movement. This is a little, animal-centric in terms of understanding behavior. I would say most of what we know plants do is chemical or physiological. There are a whole host of chemical reactions that they can sort of bring about in response to fairly quick sort of like samples of their environment. So when maple and beech saplings are being eaten by a deer, specific compounds in the deer's saliva cause the plant to ramp up tannin production above the levels you would see from just cutting with a knife. So it can, this is from this paper, salivary cues, simulated roe deer browsing induces systemic changes in phytohormones and defense chemistry in wild-grown maple and beech saplings. So the tree can sense when it's a deer rather than a knife and will ramp up. So tannins are the stuff that makes wine sort of dry and bitter, that kind of thing. And lots of plants make it. They make it to make, they produce it partly to keep herbivores from eating it because it kind of tastes bad. Yeah. Okay, so lots and lots of kind of internal mechanisms that plants can draw on to respond to threats from their environment. Communication. I feel the same unease here saying plants communicate as I do talking about artificial intelligence, because it's not obvious that that's the right term to be using, but let's go with it because I don't know what else to call it. So plants will release, tons and tons of plants release volatile organic compounds in response to stimuli like damage, and those VOCs produce responses in kin and non-kin. The smell of freshly cut grass, pleasant as it is the grass screaming in agony that it is damaged. And all the plants around it, not all the plants, but like other grass senses that as a signal and responds to it by doing things like pumping nutrients down into its root structure where it's going to be safe from. So what the grass probably thinks is happening is not that your HOA demands that you cut your grass to a certain length, but that it's being eaten by some animal. And then when you do that, the thing to do is get all your nutrients and stuff down into your root structure to preserve it so you can regrow after that animal has moved on. So lots and lots of species of plants do this kind of thing. Okay. Sensing vibration. Let's get weirder. So this is from the reading. For instance, the plant Arabidopsis thaliana can detect through epidermal outgrowths, hairs called trichromes, the specific vibrations produced by the munching of caterpillars and respond to them by synthesizing toxins. The specific sound of munching caterpillars causes a chemical reaction to start in this plant. They can hear stuff. Sort of. Kind of. This is, again, we should be holding these words very, very lightly. Communication, hearing. There are certainly, this is an example of plants responding to sound. Okay? It's not a complicated response. They're not writing a book. But it is a response. And they test this by playing sound of caterpillar munching versus playing other sounds. Okay. I don't know, just gonna run down these examples. I love this stuff. I think it's super neat. Okay, so here's one from wild potatoes. Okay, so one of the things that eats wild potatoes are, there's two kinds of mice. Mites, little bugs, and one kind wants to eat the potato, and one kind wants to eat other bugs, right? So, predatory mites, the ones that want to eat other bugs, usually hang out at the top of the flowers eating pollen. Potatoes don't mind that. They're producing pollen at least partly to attract bugs so that they can carry that pollen to other plants and fertilize them. So the potato plant is pretty happy with these predatory mites eating their pollen on top. But if there's some other mites that eat herbivorous, they will eat plants. The potato plant doesn't like that. So if it senses herbivorous spider mites attacking the leaves, the plant changes the VOCs it releases, which attracts the predatory mites to come down from the flowers into the leaves to attack the other mites. That's nuts. Okay. Isn't that cool? I don't know. I think that's super cool. Okay. Again, so again, we're not writing a book. We're not like playing chess. What I'm hoping that this shows is behavior. These plants are behaving. Does that sound fair to you? From what we've seen so far, does that sound like behavior to you? Now, okay, this one. This one keeps me up at night. This one's really weird. Okay, mimicry. So in the reading, they report. Oh no, this isn't the reading. Gianoli and Carasacco report that climbing vine, Bocula trifilata, appears to mimic the leaves of the trees that it climbs. It's a vine that grows on trees, and it grows leaves that look like the leaves of the tree. So I'm going to show you some pictures of this. So the arrow is there's a little white arrow here. So this is T is tree and V is vine. So note the shape of the vine's leaves when it's growing on this tree. Okay, here's another one. Same species of vine. There's V, that's the vine's leaves, and that's the tree's leaves. Here's a different species, that's the tree's leaves, and this is the vine's leaves. There's a different species, here's the vine's leaves and the tree's leaves, the vine's leaves and the tree's leaves. What the hell, man? How does it, okay, so first of all, that's awesome. Second of all, how does it do that? And the short answer is we don't know yet. We don't know how this works. There's a bunch of hypotheses kicking around. We currently lack a mechanistic explanation for this unique phenomena. Some kind of transmission of maybe you can sense the volatile. What we've already established is that plants can sort of like take volatile organic compounds as signals from other plants. So maybe it's picking up on characteristic volatile organic compounds. Maybe horizontal gene transfer. So we humans almost exclusively get our genes from our parents, or whoever birthed us. But plants and bacteria very often do this horizontal gene transfer. They trade genes around between each other without reproducing. So maybe something like that. But that's probably not true because the plants don't need to be touching for this to happen. Belushka and Mancuso, 2016, 2017, speculate that it could be a form of protovision. Maybe the vine can see what the shape of the leaves are and recreates it. This is the best we got. Yeah.
Speculate related. Do we know if it works on plants that aren't native to where it's native?
I believe so. I believe it does. I'd have to revisit this literature, but yeah, I believe so. I think that part of what comes out of this sort of protovision, one of the reasons why the protovision theory comes about is because stuff like that. For the recording, I just blasted my clicker across the room into 3 quite distinct parts. All right. Okay. Isn't that nuts? I don't know. Plants can maybe see and hear. They maybe can see and hear. A little bit, some of them, maybe. I don't know. You can, I don't know if I recommend this, but when I was writing this lecture, I started, do you know how it feels like something for there to be people in the room with you that you're aware of their perspective? Like I'm standing here and part of my brain is modeling what it's like for you to be there seeing me. You can kind of do that. You can kind of like, I found that I could kind of voluntarily do that with like trees and stuff. Like, what if that tree is sensing its environment? What would that tree be seeing right now? Like, what does the world look like from that plant's perspective? And I found it wasn't actually all that hard. I couldn't like switch it on and have it stay on, but I could voluntarily start asking myself, like, what would it feel like to be that plant right now? You know, you got these deep roots down into the ground. You got your branches sticking up in the air. You sense light, probably smells, chemical changes in the ground, rain. I don't know. What's it like to be a tree? I found it was nice. If you're feeling like lonely, you might. So what I found was suddenly, so people who do research in this area talk about plant blindness. Kids can identify a whole bunch of different animals in their environment. Very few kids, say growing up in Toronto in 2025, can identify a bunch of plants in their environment. It's not something that sort of like comes into our awareness. So I started doing this experiment on my own phenomenology, and I'm like, damn, there's a lot more plants around than I thought. I suddenly started seeing them everywhere. It was very interesting. I don't know that I recommend that you do that, but I thought it was neat. And it made you're walking down the street and there's nobody around, like, oh no, there's a bunch of trees around. I don't know if they can sense me. Please don't go and be like, my prof told me all plants can see and hear. That's not what we're saying here. But like, I don't know. This mimicry is just mind-blowing to me. The hearing thing, and then the complex chemical responses, all of this is just bizarre. Stuff I never would have expected plants to be capable of. Looks like they're capable of. Yeah.
Is there any proven benefits correct and number one?
Mimicking the other one. There must be. I can't recall what it is. There must be.
Do you know like insects like some of the stick or
Yeah.
like but with that that was that close less than the street.
I don't know the specific answer to what benefit that they give. There must be some benefit. This is just my ignorance. I think I would, if I went back to the literature, they would probably say fairly straightforwardly. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe the tree can see the vines and it would like shake them off or something. No, the longer I spend in this literature, the weirder I get about plants. I'm like, what do they know? What are they doing? And it's the people who are in the kind of plant cognition world, I'm not going to lie, they get a bit weird about it. Such that you might start worrying about the objectivity of their research program. And they're a bit secluded in their, people think this is odd research. And I'm not trained enough in the kind of like discipline to defend myself against going weird about it. So I try to minimize my exposure. Yeah.
Something service and confidence was asked of us there.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know like the extent of the mimicry? Like, do you drew that up next to like a pine tree?
Yeah. I don't think it can do pine trees. I don't think it can do pine trees. Yeah.
So they just like, do they know the range of plants that it can mimic? Like, is it just like a sort of thing that's like a plasticity type of thing?
I think I don't recall any answers to the wide range. It's tough to study vines. Very often are very tough to like grow. You can't just like grow it in a lab easily. Vines usually need fairly specific conditions and are, so like, I don't think that they can, it's not easy to do the experiments, to be like, okay, let's try it against this plant, that plant, this plant. So these are all taken from the wild, as you can see. So that's where the data is coming from. So then if you're taking info from the wild, you can't ask, well, what would this be like, say, in the different continent or something like that? So those are just open questions, I think, yeah.
I'm sorry. And I looked up an article of some clouds, there will like mimic other things on the cloud to trap pollinators.
Yep.
What did show there?
Yep. Plant mimicry. Yep. So, okay. So, what lessons do I think that stuff's real nifty, and I like telling people nifty stuff, so I told it to you. But we should be trying to draw some sort of lesson out of all of this, and what lesson should we take? And the plant mimicry is a nice case to think about. So the really weird thing about these vines is that they are responding seemingly in the scale of one lifetime to the leaves. Now, how do you explain, so if just two plants come to look similar, can you explain that without them being smart? Is there a mechanism you can use to explain the similarity of two plants if it would be beneficial to, say, the survival and reproduction of one of them? Yes.
Because they're in the same area, it grows similar.
Could be. I was thinking natural selection. Natural selection. I assume that's how most biomimicry is explained. It's just like the flowers in this region that look like the plant with pollen got more bee visitors and therefore survived better. So natural selection caused them to look the same. That doesn't require anything of the plant in terms of intelligence or behavior, right? Natural selection is a kind of like external sifting process that acts on your species without your species necessarily knowing or anything or super duper participating in the process. The bizarre thing about this specific type of mimicry is that it's not that these plants were naturally selected over 1,000 years to have this mimicry. It's within one lifetime they take on the look of a plant that they're beside. That's weird. So let's take a minute to step back from okay, so those are my examples of plants doing stuff that looks smart. Taking a step back from that, let's consider the case of things that kind of look intelligent, but maybe aren't. So here's the Watt governor. Has anybody seen this thing before? Watt governor? Let me show you this. So this is an old-timey mechanism from back in the days of steam engines. So you got a steam engine. You're powering it by shoveling coal into an oven and using that to boil water, and the steam pushes the mechanism. That is an imprecise process. Like, you can't be like, okay, Jerry, shovel just the exact right amount of coal. We don't want to go 50 kilometers an hour, shovel 50 kilometers worth of coal. That's not that's not going to work out for you. So you need some kind of mechanism to govern how much steam goes to the drivetrain. And it's something like this. So imagine this thing pointing upwards, and there's these two heavy weights on sort of cantilevered arms, and it's spinning around. So as the wheels move forward, that drives this thing to spin vertically. And of course, centrifugal force raises these two weights up. The faster and faster your train is actually going, the higher those two weights are raised up by centrifugal force, which drives a valve that reduces how much steam goes to the drivetrain. So the faster you're going, the less steam goes to the drivetrain, and then you slow down a bit, and that opens it back up again. So it's kind of like dynamically self-balance. It's very clever. It was by James Watt. So dynamically self-balancing to regulate the temperature, or not the temperature, the speed of a steam engine. Now, a very intelligent person created that. Lots of intelligence in that sense. Possibly similar to how, natural selection acts as though it's a very clever engineer. Sometimes it acts like it's a terrible engineer, but sometimes it does some really clever stuff. But that doesn't mean that the Watt governor is itself intelligent. Do we agree on that? That thing is just some spinning weights. It's not smart. Does that sound right? It looks like a very clever person acting in a goal-directed manner. I'm not sure we should call that goal-directed. Right? So if we're coming back to this idea of living things, non-animal living things as agents. To be an agent, you've got to have goals that you are pursuing. This thing, I'm not sure we could call it. I don't think you should say it's pursuing goals. It's just a mechanism. It's a pure, simple mechanism. Okay, so my own slide has betrayed me. Okay, so in a sense, the WOT governor is goal-directed. In some sense. I don't think it's the relevant sense is what I'm getting at. You can use words however you want. Philosophers have this disease where we think words only have one meaning, and it's our job to discover them. You can call this goal-directed if you want. I think that there is a sense of goal-directed that is richer and more interesting, and that it is the one that we should use to attribute agency. We give the WOT governor a goal. It doesn't have a goal itself, and that's what matters for agency. It having intrinsic goals that are its own. The WOT governor it's a lump of metal. It has no goals of its own. We have a goal for it. I would like to claim that I have goals. I have intrinsic goals. You don't have to endorse them for me to have them. You don't have to know about them for me to have them. I just have goals. Probably all humans have goals. Probably all animals have goals. That sounds reasonable to me. The question is, do plants have goals? And what can we see in the evidence that we've seen, the behavioral evidence that I've shown you so far, that maybe they do or don't have goals? Okay, so perhaps we could distinguish straightforward equilibrium from goal-directedness. We're going to do some philosophy of science now, just for a minute. There's just a great big debate about what we should or shouldn't call goal-directed. None of this is definitive, but I'll just give you I'll give you a take on it so you've got something to start with. There are people who think a ball rolling down to the bottom of a bowl is goal-directed, because no matter which route it takes, it's going to end up at the bottom of the bowl. I don't know. I don't think that should count. If this is goal-directed, then any system with an equilibrium point, which is to say any system that doesn't have energy being constantly pumped into it, is goal-directed. And that seems a little broad. It's certainly not the kind of goal-directed that you want if what we're trying to do is attribute agency and non-agency. Like if you want to figure out who's an agent, this notion of goal-directedness is too thin. It's too simple. So here's a richer sense. Here's a more involved sense of goal-directedness. Walsh, 2006, Organisms as Natural Purposes, the Contemporary Evolutionary Perspective, says that for something to be goal-directed, it should have these three things: persistency, plasticity, and repertoire. So it should be persistent. If you get perturbed off your goal, you should reorient back towards the goal. Like a guided missile kind of thing. It should have plasticity. It should have a variety of flexible strategies of reorienting. Guided missiles don't really have plasticity. Adjusting their direction is all they've got. But if I get perturbed off my goal of like going to find lunch, there's no food in my refrigerator, I will adopt a whole new strategy. Skip the dishes and I will go get lunch. I will readjust the kind of behavior, not just the specific behaviors, but the whole kind of behavior I'm engaged in. And I have a deep repertoire, a bunch of different possible behaviors to select from. And you can tell I'm goal-directed because I select just the ones that are just right, some of the time, for moving me towards my goals. So you want a system that persistently goes towards a goal with a variety of different means selected from this deep repertoire of possible behaviors. Maybe that counts as goal-directed. Yeah? It's not obvious to me that some of these examples say, let's use this one, this defense mechanism. So you're being munched upon by a deer, you can sense its saliva, and then you increase tannin production. It's not obvious to me that that has the kind of plasticity or repertoire. I guess there's the difference between it being munched upon versus being cut by a knife is a sort of repertoire, a little, maybe. Yeah.
How important is having even means to do something? This is the clearest way
Yeah.
sort of just thought of, what about, so we do that correctly for this paralyzed.
Yeah.
Have a repertoire. Does that mean that something that they're not so oriented for any specific thing?
So
like, does having the ability, is that, like, completely necessary to move goal directed? How much of it can just be
Yeah.
your thought and words?
So somebody who's paralyzed presumably has, I mean, if you've become paralyzed, you have a bunch of things that you can do. It's just you're being blocked from doing them. So you might, it's that precisely the repertoire is the kind of latent possibilities of your behavior. And it might well be that something blocks those latent possibilities from being actualized. You still have the repertoire. Yeah, yeah. I don't think if somebody can't move, then they can't make goal-directed bodily actions because you can't.
Like, they can,
They could think it. Yeah, and their thoughts would be goal-directed.
like, someone, how could we, like, certain that for animals really carry their lives so someone can see their act?
I don't know. I have no good suggestion. There's huge sort of methodological questions in all of this because there's so much that we don't know and can't access about living things. Okay. So maybe we've got this richer sense of goal directedness. Maybe there are some plants that can do this kind of thing. So in the reading, we talked about decision making. Trevaz reports that when exemplars of this plant are offered adjacent habitats to grow, they choose the habitat with the best conditions of competition, warmth, and light. However, C. canadiensis can also discriminate these conditions in combination, choosing light plus warm soil in preference to others. So there's at least, so you've got your repertoire is grow towards this habitat or grow towards that habitat. That's at least some repertoire. You're moving towards a thing that you want. I don't know. It could well be that there are depths of goal directedness. It could be that you're like pursuing your life goals as a human being in its full complexity is the deepest kind of goal directedness we know. And then maybe animals have a somewhat simpler and plants have a simpler, much simpler version of this. That's a sliding scale is a possibility for our concept of goal directedness here. But that might be a kind of repertoire of behavior. I can grow this way or I can grow that way. I don't know. Okay. Thoughts on this? I don't know. I leave it to you to consider how goal-directed you want to think plants are. Briefly, I'll do this thing on learning and memory. This was a sad story for me because I got real hyped about this first paper. So one of the criteria for sentience from Ascent, associative learning that goes beyond habituation and sensitization. Our sensitive plant, Mimosa pudica, if you keep tapping on it and tapping on it and tapping on it, it eventually stops folding up. So that's habituation. We want something more than that if we're going to attribute kind of full cognition to plants. So this review on the conditioning of plants, or review of experimental evidence, there's not much. It's pretty thin. Mimosa pudica does show stimulus-specific habituation. This 1965 article, Learning in Plants, Worm Runner's Digest. That is not a journal I'm familiar with, but it can discriminate between different stimuli. So if you put drops of regularly drip water on it, it stops responding to the water. But if you touch it with a finger, it will once again fold up. So that's something. That's habituation. This is the paper that I got really psyched about, and let me tell you, it was a letdown when I read the follow-up. Gagliano et al. So Gagliano is one of these like deep believers in plant cognition. She really thinks that the world will change when we realize how much learning plants actually do. So she set up this really interesting test to try to show associative learning in plants. So the pea is so you've got a pea plant. It's in this little cup at the bottom, and then there's one tube from which light comes and one tube from which wind comes. It can either be the same tube or different tubes. Now the peas want the light, so they're going to grow toward the light. We know this. But the question is, can you train them to associate the blowing wind and the light? such that they would grow towards just the wind. This is like a Pavlov's dog thing. Like you train the association between two stimuli, and then present only one of it which it definitely wants and one of which is just associated, and then you present the just associated one and see if you get the same response. That's associative learning. That's one of Ascent criteria for sentience. And Gagliano et al. Report that yes, they did find us. So when they do this, you train these plants to respond to, when you give them the air and the light together, then they will just grow towards the light. Neat. Associative learning. And then it just fails to replicate. So this would be big if true. This would be big if true. If plants can do associative learning, if they can learn to associate arbitrary different stimuli in their environment, that's one of the criteria from the Ascent project, right? Like if you see that in a hermit crab, you're like, sentience. But maybe plants can do it, but nah, they can't really do it. Markle 2020 ran the same experiment again, a little bit more carefuler. Yeah, that's right, more carefuler, and found a kind of null result. They used a somewhat larger sample size, blinded scoring, so that the person doing the scoring about which direction it's growing in didn't know whether it was a intervention or control, and it didn't really work out. So I was really excited about this paper for a while, and then I looked. Take this as an object lesson. Look it up on Google Scholar. Go find the cited by. Look it up on Google Scholar. Right underneath, you can find a thing that says which papers have cited it, so you can go forward in the literature. So you don't have, at least the heartbreak will be quicker. So in this review, Adelman 2018 says the only really promising evidence for conditioning that goes beyond habituation was Gagliano et al. There doesn't look like plants can do associative learning, at least as of 2018. So maybe it's okay to still eat plants. Hopefully, I'm gonna go get lunch soon, so I hope it is. Okay. And this I just want to flag. The final section of the reading is on various proposals that support the idea of plant consciousness. They seem to treat consciousness and sentience interchangeably. I mostly want to flag this to say this is not on the midterm. This section I would describe, if you tried to read it, I would describe this as dauntingly technical, unless you have a fair bit of background in cognitive science or any of that stuff. That section will not be on the midterm. That's not testable. Don't worry about it. There's too much there for us to get into it, unless you want to get into integrated information theory in the next 15 minutes. Anyone? No, let's not do that. Okay, so that's the reading. Let's just take 1 second though. Okay, so does it make sense to think about plants as agents governed by norms? Is there a good life for plants? Like, I take it that the fundamental question for us in terms of deciding how to spend our lives is, what is the good life for us? Is that a question that only applies to us, or is it a question that also applies to plants? So Philippe Foot's proposal is, we can at least ground the logic of our own question about what's the good life in the logic of what does it mean to have a good life as a plant? What do you think? Yeah.
I didn't to argue that in this case, there is something that, but is that the carry studies of non-concept.
Yep.
Should be the fashions that, like, as in like the global.
No.
This will be probably just for biology starting testing. There is some sort of, scoring can go that what is I'm really a good web, maybe it's a big something feisty.
Yeah.
But I do also think that, like, as you were talking about it, I think the complexity and like plasticity that we talked about is a very distinct match to go or reason. Because you can't instruct you one measurements.
Yeah.
There's some of the complexity where, like, so I did some ways to interpret the collection so that really complex features to get like very I guess, complex answers.
Yeah.
So in that sense, even though, let's say, something has, there's like a sense of consistency, different, like, what was it called when you have
Repertoire, yeah.
those three criteria still like implementation complexity that the actual concepts of table orient.
Right.
Which two things with the same for how like complex is least.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, and an LLM has those three things, I would say. Perhaps what distinguishes us from them is we give ourselves goals, whereas a machine only has the goals that we've given it. I think plants might give themselves goals in a sense. It's not something if the plant has goals, it's not something that we gave it. It had it all on its own. But we certainly are goal makers more than just goal havers. Yeah.
So the authors who of the reading of the
Yeah.
were they arguing that because plants are goal oriented, they fit the definition of the Ascent Project's version of the narrow sentience?
No. Okay, no. Yeah, no. They were just doing a review of the evidence for fancy behavior in plants. So the connection with Ascent is one I'm making, is not one that was made in the reading. They gesture at the idea that plants might be sentient, but then their heart's not really in it. That's the bulk of the paper is spent just trying to show that their plants think or that they have cognition, they behave in goal-directed ways. Yeah, but not that they're only the faintest gesture at the end, a bit like maybe consciousness, but yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
I mean, I think that one of the reasons we repeat that game talk also says it's a diverse. I mean, we have this diversity of
Yeah.
like one person is tough to good like
Good.
person or not necessarily the good like for another person.
Good.
Plants is that they all look like they have the same goals.
Right.
So because there's a diversity of goals, it looks like it's coded in
Right.
rather than decided by the plant.
Good. Yeah. So the test of whether something is goal-directed is if its goals are variable. Potentially variable. Yeah, good. Interesting. Thanks. Okay. Other quick thoughts? Okay, let's call it for today. Thanks, everybody. Next time we will talk about animacy and inanimacy.